Ever feel like you're trying to piece together a puzzle with, well, a million tiny pieces? Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really fascinating historical example, how a huge, widespread movement managed to stay unified, despite, honestly, massive differences.
We're talking about the early spread of Christianity
Right.
and the challenges, the very real challenges, of keeping things together across all these diverse cultures and beliefs.
Exactly. And our guide here is some really insightful historical analysis from that period.
Yeah, excerpts from a text digging into this.
And our mission really is to unpack the strategies they used. How did they foster that unity? And maybe, just maybe, see what insights that offers us today.
It's kind of a shortcut, yeah, to understanding a pretty complex historical puzzle.
Definitely. And what strikes me right off the bat is this core idea. The unity of the early church wasn't something they felt they had to create.
No, it was seen as already there. A fundamental pre-existing reality. That's key.
Okay, so let's dig into that foundation first. What was it built on?
Well, what's fascinating, the text really stresses this, is the bedrock. It wasn't just local groups agreeing.
Right.
Individual converts, wherever they were connected deeply. Through baptism, this idea of a shared spirit, a common faith.
And shared experiences too, right? Dangers, hopes?
Absolutely. And those were powerful unifiers, much stronger than just, local agreements. They transcended the local scene.
And it wasn't just individuals feeling connected, the churches themselves. They weren't islands.
No, not at all. They saw themselves as interconnected.
Yeah.
Like regional parts of a bigger whole.
Yeah.
The text mentions provinces Macedonia, Achaia, Galatia, Syria, and Cilicia. Asia is seen as units.
Cohesive units within this larger thing.
Yeah. And we see this practically with the collection for the poor saints in Jerusalem.
Oh, right. That collection.
It wasn't just charity. It was coordinated. Churches across provinces appointed representatives.
To manage the aid.
Exactly. That shared task, that responsibility, it built a sense of belonging that went way beyond local culture or geography. Unity in action.
Something that really jumped out at me was this idea about the universal church versus the local ones. The text says the universal church existed first. Can you unpack that? Why is that significant?
It really flips how we often think about organizations, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The idea isn't congregations getting together to form a church. It's more like this overarching church established these local expressions.
Okay.
Think about Paul asking the Corinthians, did the word of God come out from you? Or did it just come to you?
Implying it came from somewhere else, somewhere bigger.
Precisely. And they often referred to the whole body of believers as the congregation of God. It points to this sense of a prior universal thing they were all part of.
So they started with this built-in sense of being part of something much larger. Okay, so how did that actually work day to day? Across distances, different communities, how did they connect?
Communication was just vital. The text really hits on the role of trade routes. They were the highways of the ancient world.
Made it easier to get around, talk to each other?
Definitely. Facilitated frequent interaction. And people were constantly moving.
Like an ancient social network?
Sort of. You had this constant flow. Visitors, prophets, emissaries, especially coming out of Jerusalem.
Right, people carrying news and influence.
It wasn't just casual travel. These folks often had real authority, or at least carried important messages. This flow cultivated shared stories, mutual accountability.
Kept everyone sort of on the same page, or at least aware of each other.
Yeah. And then there was the practical thing of commendation by letter.
Letters of introduction, basically.
Exactly. Like credentials, ensuring recognized believers were welcomed, shown hospitality when they showed up somewhere new. It built personal bonds, trust across regions.
So you have the big idea, the universal church, and these very practical ways of connecting people. Seems really intentional.
It does. But the text also stresses it wasn't just practical stuff.
Okay.
There was this deeper, most real spiritual unity binding them, seeing themselves as members of one body, united by submission to a common founder, Christ, obviously, and the core teachings, the ethics passed down from the apostles.
And this wasn't just Paul's network.
No, the text is clear. This unity included churches in Judea, the church in Syria, places Paul didn't directly found. It was broader.
Okay, it paints a picture of amazing cohesion, especially for back then. But surely it wasn't all smooth sailing. Different cultures, backgrounds, there had to be clashes.
Oh, absolutely. The potential for major cultural friction was huge, especially between Jewish and Gentile Christians. The text paints a vivid picture. Imagine a Christian from, say, Macedonia visiting Judea.
Okay, what would they find? What would be the shock?
Total immersion. Suddenly they're encountering circumcision, strict Sabbath keeping, complex dietary laws.
Things totally unfamiliar to a Greek background.
Right. A more, maybe, austere way of life. Prayers following Jewish patterns, maybe in a language they didn't even understand. Christianity there might have looked almost exactly like Judaism to them.
Wow, okay, flip that. What about a Jerusalem Christian visiting Corinth?
The text suggests maybe an even bigger shock.
Really?
They might see what looks like unbridled license, uncircumcised Christians eating at feasts in pagan temples.
Which would be unthinkable back in Judea.
Totally. A seeming disregard for the ceremonial law. Different styles of preaching, prayer, maybe what seemed like an undignified freedom in how people behaved.
And you mentioned factions within those Gentile churches, too.
Yes, even a group pushing for everyone to follow the entire Jewish law.
So huge cultural divides. And it wasn't only Jew versus Gentile, was it? There were issues within the Greek churches, too.
Precisely. Differences on how relevant Old Testament laws still were. Clean and unclean meats, for instance.
Bagel Sue.
Yeah, the significance of idols. How important were specific holy days. Some were strict, others felt Christ freed them from all that.
And even core beliefs like the resurrection interpretations differed.
That's right. Some apparently saw it as purely spiritual, not a physical event.
Which has huge implications.
Massive. For salvation, the afterlife, everything.
So you've got potential splits within the Gentile churches and this major risk of the Judean churches basically saying, nope, you Gentile churches aren't legit.
Exactly. A really volatile situation.
How on earth do they navigate that? Avoid just fragmenting completely. What was Paul's strategy?
This is where it gets really insightful. Paul's approach, basically. The text contrasts two ways you could go.
Okay.
One is, set up a central command, a rule-based system, like the Roman Empire's admin, or maybe later church hierarchies.
Top down, clear rules, everyone follows.
Right. But Paul, he chose something radically different. He saw these new churches as, equally valid parts of the whole, spirit-bearing parts of something still evolving.
So not imposing the old rules.
He consciously decided not to impose Judean laws and customs on Gentiles, even though that put him at risk, got him criticized.
That must have been hugely controversial then.
Oh, undoubtedly. His approach, prioritizing the spirit over rigid rules, wasn't just practical. It kind of redefined unity itself, away from just outward conformity towards something internal. A big insight for any diverse group, really.
And he resisted setting up a central authority structure.
Consistently.
Right.
The text notes only one time he supported an appeal to the Jerusalem Council, and that wasn't even for a church he founded.
Interesting.
For his churches, the pattern was advice, guidance, yes, but respecting their autonomy, leaving final decisions to them.
He defended them too.
Vigorously.
Yeah.
Defended their theology, their freedom, when people from Jerusalem came challenging their practices.
It sounds like he was wary of defining things too rigidly, like what counts as correct belief.
Exactly. The text points out there weren't these a priori tests of orthodoxy, no preset checklists.
We know what he taught positively.
Right, but he didn't lay out a big list of heresies before they happened. Even in Corinth, with all its issues, the exact reasons for excommunication weren't predefined. His strength was addressing problems as they arose, not trying to legislate for every possibility.
And he didn't just apply past decisions everywhere either.
Another crucial point. Those Jerusalem Council decrees, they were for specific situations, not universally enforced in Macedonia or Achaia.
Why not?
Paul got the contexts differed hugely. What worked or was natural in one place could be artificial, even harmful somewhere else.
There's that powerful quote the text uses, something about every age needing its own definitions.
Yeah, if it is a true doctrine that everyone shall bear his own burden, it is equally true that every age must produce its own definitions and every church its own precedents.
Wow. So really emphasizing context over just repeating the past.
He saw the danger in substituting precedent for real, lived conviction. Each generation, each church, had to wrestle with the questions themselves.
So, if it wasn't rules and universal precedents, what was his core idea of unity? What held it together?
Fundamentally spiritual. It wasn't about everyone looking and acting the same outwardly. It was a vital internal agreement rooted in that shared spirit.
Something you couldn't force.
Couldn't force it, couldn't legislate it. Outward unity without that interconnection. Empty.
But
But he also believed genuine inward unity should show itself outwardly, in community shared life. So division was serious. It signaled a lack of that deeper spiritual coherence.
Okay, that's the philosophy. What about the practical steps, the positive things he did to build and strengthen unity?
Several key things. First, he just acted as if unity was the reality. Took it for granted.
And taught it that way.
Taught it as lived experience.
Yeah.
Constantly reminding them of mutual responsibility, brotherhood.
Pointing out shared struggles, too.
Yes, reminding them of shared difficulties, what other churches were going through.
Right.
Building empathy, solidarity, and encouraging hospitality's simple, practical connection.
And he used his own unique position, didn't he? Bridging Jew and Greek.
Absolutely. A Pharisee with Greek education. Perfectly placed. He kept his Jewish connections in Jerusalem while fighting for Gentile freedom elsewhere.
Trusted by leaders on both sides.
Use that influence to prevent splits. Those risky trips back to Jerusalem the text mentions, they were crucial for holding things together.
And the collection for Jerusalem, again, seems so central.
Hugely central. More than just charity, it was a powerful, tangible symbol of unity. A concrete pledge.
Proof of their fellowship.
Exactly. Paul saw it as vital evidence against those in Jerusalem wanting to impose the law. The text even suggests that one act of practical support probably did more than tons of theological argument.
Embodied belief, basically.
Right. And finally, he pushed for constant communication, common action. The collection itself was an example, churches working together, sending representatives.
Multiple perspectives working together.
He saw the value in that, countering distortion, building trust, deeper understanding.
It's amazing to see that dynamic approach. Now, the text we're drawing on, it also contrasts this with modern missionary approaches. What's the comparison there?
It offers a bit of a critique, yeah?
Yeah.
Suggests that modern missions, maybe shaped by divisions back home, often fear similar splits in new places.
So they tend to?
Tend to transplant existing structures, organizational models, theological frameworks from the home country, rather than letting something more organic grow locally.
You mean like exporting European bishoprics or parish structures?
Kind of, mirroring the home structures, and often a big emphasis on external uniformity, same services, prayer books, rituals.
So travelers feel at home.
That seems to be the idea, which might sound nice.
But the text sees downsides.
It argues that when divisions do happen in modern missions, they often reflect the imported divisions, denominational issues from back home, rather than the kind of fundamental cultural clashes, like Jew versus Gentile, that the early church faced.
The text had that hypothetical, a Judaizing Macedonian church splitting along Jewish party lines.
Yeah, to highlight how different the source of division often is.
So the focus shifts to maintaining the imported model, stopping familiar fights, rather than nurturing unity that fits the local reality.
That's the argument. The text notes you rarely see modern mission groups dealing with accusations about violating local customs or really strong assertions of local church autonomy like Paul did.
It's more centralized.
Rules often come from Western boards, applied broadly. The unity achieved, the text suggests, can be more a uniformity of custom, enforced by missionaries based on Western ways.
And this comes at a cost. What are the potential negative consequences mentioned?
Well, the text suggests things like maybe a lack of prophetic fire in local churches, fewer chances for self-realization, developing truly indigenous leaders.
A lack of native apostles, native theology.
That kind of thing. And maybe less vigorous, organic growth as a result. It ends by questioning if just focusing on making converts or proselytes might actually stop new churches from enriching the whole church, like the Greek churches did back then.
That's a really challenging comparison. So, wrapping up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways from Paul's approach to unity?
I think the core insight is that his approach was grounded in this idea of a pre-existing spiritual reality.
Not something manufactured.
Right. And he nurtured it through constant communication, real mutual support, and crucially, deep respect for different contexts, not by forcing everyone into the same mold.
Which really makes you think, doesn't it, about any group effort, any movement. How do you balance the core principles with that needed flexibility, that real respect for different viewpoints?
It leaves you, the listener, with a big question. Maybe the real challenge isn't getting rid of differences and forcing conformity, but understanding how those very differences might actually enrich the whole body, strengthen it. It's worth pondering. Should the goal be uniformity, or a deeper unity that thrives on, learns from, is energized by many voices, many experiences?